Welcome into Basketball by Association. My name is Arky. Shea. That is Joel C. Cortez doing most of this associating here on this here podcast. The season has begun. We are 3 weeks in, Joel, and I cannot believe that my New York Knicks are undefeated. 11-0 so far this season. It's been a wild ride so far. Biggest shock to me, honestly, is that the Celtics are 0-9.
Is this future prognostication? This is your prediction for the start of the season?
This is more of a prayer going out to the universe, hoping that the Lord's listening. Listen,
Speak it into existence, man. Speak it into existence.
What am I supposed to do? Everybody else gets players, and the Knicks are like, Josh Hart's fun. It's like,
You have collected the entire Villanova roster from like 6 years ago, so you're good. What else do you really need? Don't get greedy.
That's a fair point. That is a fair point. If you were coached by anyone on that Villanova staff for the last 8 years, you're officially a member of the New York Knicks. You get a free pass.
You're good.
You're good. You're good. Some of you are good. Some of you are. Well, you're good. You're good. Joel, before we get started on this here purd, can you tell me what this episode is now named after?
Yeah, this is episode 154, second episode of season 5, which is kind of fun. And we have two choices, two players in NBA history who have logged 154 career playoff games. One of them was Sam Jones from the Celtics. I almost picked him, but he was probably going to be hard to guess. This other guy shouldn't be that hard to guess. There are some clues. There are some clues right in front of you, Arky Shea. But this is a Hall of Famer, a 9-time All-Star. He was a champion in 2006. He was the 90 and 91 on the All-Rookie team. The 95-96 Defensive Player of the Year. He's 9-time All-NBA, 9-time All-Defensive, and he is on the NBA 75th anniversary team. If I tell you his nickname, it will give it away instantly. Because unlike Jerry West, who had last week one very recognizable nickname and then like 5 others that we had never heard of, this one you've heard of.
Oh, just tell me, bro. It's always a quiz. My brain hurts today. What would have got? Who?
It's staring you in the face.
The glove.
The glove.
The glove.
It's
Gary
time
Payton?
for some GP love.
All right.
Here. We can all get on board with that. Gary Payton, one of the iconic, I think, early 90s players who ushered in the new era of the NBA. It was still Jordan's league for sure. But there were these younger players like Shawn Kemp, like Penny Hardaway, like Shaq, who were ushering in kind of the new, even cooler, younger generation that was going to take over from Jordan and Barkley and Karl Malone and Hakeem and all those guys, and ushered us into the 2000s.
Huh? Yeah. I was trying to think of that time frame, but yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a terrible analyzing by you.
Yeah. Kevin Garnett was one of those guys too. Juwan Howard, Chris Webber, all Jalen Rose, all of the Fab Four. So,
yeah, I think it's okay to say that that's sort of the dawning of the newer era of the NBA. Yeah, I think that's okay because by Gary Payton getting in year, that's what like 9 or 10 for Jordan. So yeah, I think you're probably about right. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I think those guys opened the door then to taking the NBA from a place that was culturally relevant with Jordan to all of a sudden very cool amongst the youths with their generation to then somebody like Allen Iverson and Vince Carter being able to come along and suddenly, basketball becomes a culture thing. As much as it is a pop culture thing, it is a cultural statement. So we don't have to do all the deep dives. This is the Eastern Conference preview show, Arky Shea, and we're going to play a really simple game because we have a lot of teams to cover in a relatively short period of time. We're going to run down the list of the standings from last year, how they finished, and we're simply going to play the game. Are they better, worse, or about the same? And give a quick reason why. And I will even let you answer for the Knicks.
Okay.
This time. I mean, I'm going to throw you a bone here. I'll let you pick when we get to New York. But we're not doing predictions on like standings and how they'll finish and stuff like that. We'll get to that in a future show.
Yeah, and we'll get to some recent news that's happened as we start talking about the teams. So, all right, let's run them down, starting with the 16th team in the league.
You want to go from worst to first or first to worst?
No. We will go. I think we should go first to worst.
Okay.
And yes,
So then that was Milwaukee last year.
And I know
First in
there's
the
only 15 teams in each of everybody.
regulars.
Or there are 16. My bad. Okay, so first team was who last year?
Well, it was the Milwaukee Bucks finishing. We're going to go off the regular season standings, not the playoff standings, because that's going to get super confusing. Of course, the Bucks lose in the first round. Giannis was not fully healthy. Miami was just on this historic, ridiculous, Titan toppling tear, and we still don't really understand what Miami did. But are the Milwaukee Bucks better, worse, or the same than last year? Obviously, we have to talk about, which we did last week a little bit. Damian Lillard arrives, Drew Holiday leaves. Are they better? I will say this. I think they are incrementally better in that they are more well-equipped to not lose in the first round and to be the title contending team that we thought they were supposed to be. But finishing first place in the Eastern Conference regular season standings is about what we figured was going to happen for them last year anyway. I don't know that Lillard really, like, he helps them offensively. They take a step back defensively. Depth-wise, they're roughly the same, right?
So I will say this, and now I will spend the next 25 minutes on the Milwaukee Bucks now. I think we have to look at Milwaukee since they were the number one team when it comes to whether or not they got better or worse, which is can they get past getting beat in 5 by Miami, right? Like that's what we're talking about. Like, okay, can you get better beyond that? You know what? Where I do think that they are better for two reasons. One, I think you get a lot more scoring with Damian Lillard, which is I think necessary on this roster. And granted, Drew Holiday, terrific defender. I mean, he's elite level defender, right?
Solid scorer too.
Solid
nothing
scorer.
Wrong with the guy.
I think you need a dog on that team offensively when you can, and I think Damian Lillard brings you that. I do like Campaign coming to the team. I like Campaign being on the team, but this roster is essentially much of the same, despite the top end upheaval you saw a little bit. But here's the second reason why I think that they're better. I think they needed a little bit of shakeup. I think they needed a little bit of rejuvenation, and a little bit of a fresh body and fresh like injection of like an energy under this team. And I think Damian Lillard is a big enough name that does that for you. He's a big enough name at a big enough important position to be able to sort of give you more. So I do think that they're better. I do think that they're better. They're still going to be one of the last 4 teams, probably minimum. They'll be standing in the East this upcoming season. But we kind of expected that anyway going into the year. And also, by the way, you make Giannis happy. You know, you're like,
right.
You make Giannis the guy who's has not threatened until recently that he might be interested in going somewhere else at some point in his career. You say, hey, look, we won the title. We're not satisfied with just the one title. We want to be able to get you back there. You're in your prime. Let's run after this as much as we can. So, yeah, I think that they're better.
Milwaukee was a deep team last year. It was honestly the deepest roster I thought Giannis had ever had, and health and circumstance and all that stuff conspired against them. But Lillard comes in, becomes the number one option in the offensive pecking order in crunch time. Giannis is probably still number one down the stretch. That's good for Dame. That's good for Giannis. Chris Middleton's numbers may dip a little bit, but that's okay. I think his efficiency goes up. He's going to be asked to do a little bit less, but knock down shots. Chris Middleton really doesn't have an ego. He has had no problem playing second fiddle to Giannis. He had no problem with Drew Holiday coming in. And Middleton also coming off some major injuries over the last couple of years. Yes, they lose Grayson Allen. They lose Joe Ingles, but you're going to see more Pat Connaughton. You're going to see Malik Beasley. You're going to see Campaign. As you said, you'll see a lot more Jay Crowder and Marshawn Beauchamp. They're still 11 to 12 deep. Really, a lot of this comes down to how new coach Adrian Griffin deploys this team. I think he'll keep it relatively simple when you have a 2-time MVP. You have a multi-time All-Star who is hungry. Let's not forget that. Damian Lillard, in asking to leave Portland, is leaving his legacy, his home behind to do what? To chase a ring. He is on the same page with Giannis, who wants as many rings as possible in order to stay in Milwaukee. So this has a little bit of shades of a long, long time ago. It's going to be way before most of our collective memories. But there was this really, really good center called Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in Milwaukee who was chasing a title and got this really, really good wingman running mate called Oscar Robertson who was chasing his first title and had never had one, and they put it together and locked it up in Milwaukee and gave them their first banners. So there's the possibility of us seeing a historical, repeat along those lines. The Bucks have that potential. So I'd say better, but incrementally better.
Okay, one, I don't know who those names are. Two, if you don't mind if I Google. Two, are we putting Giannis and Damian in the same category as Lou Alcindor and Oscar Robertson? Now listen, Oscar.
When the day is done, I don't think it'll be ridiculous.
Run, right? Go ahead.
I was just saying, when the day is done, I don't think they're going to be that far off from one another in the conversations when their careers are all done.
I hear you. Who's number 2 from last year? Was it the Knicks? It was the Knicks, right? Can't remember any other team other than the Knicks being.
All right, we're going to Boston, everybody. It's time to talk about Celtics.
Okay, so I'll start with this one. They're much worse. Much worse. No, I don't know how you argue with what they've been able to do in the offseason, really. Especially what happened just a few days ago since we've last recorded, that they're able to get Drew Holiday to be able to come here and get Drew Holiday and essentially give up a big man like Robert Williams, who was often hurt. You're not losing a ton from him. Give up a couple of picks, but no one's playing for picks anymore, especially when you're putting those second round picks. That's all just to be figured out for, I don't know, I think 17 second rounders equals a first rounder at some point. I don't know how the math works, but it's just, it's fascinating.
Well,
but it's really hard to argue.
But for everybody else.
Yeah. And I thought, I thought Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum were going to be split up, and that would be beneficial for the team. But instead, getting rid of Marcus Smart, bringing in Kristaps, and then bringing in Drew Holiday. I mean, I don't think now I'm nearly as worried that those two dudes aren't together. I think you got, again, what those two dudes lack in Drew Holiday as far as the great, and people sort of have mentioned that he's kind of like another version of, maybe a better version slightly of a Marcus Smart having on that roster. You don't really have to worry about the 3-pointers thrown for 60 feet down the court every now and then. And I don't hate that analogy either. I think that is pretty good analysis. I think what you lost in Marcus Smart, you replaced with Drew Holiday, and you got a better overall player there. So yeah, I think they're better. I think they'll still be out in the first round, but I think they'll be better.
This is going to be a little bit controversial because I love them adding Drew Holiday. I have no problem with that, but I think the Celtics are the same at best. They might even be slightly worse, and here's why. Marcus Smart was the heart and soul of that team and the guy who played with a chip on his shoulder. Drew Holiday is the better player. There's no way around that. Holiday is a better defender. There's only 3-4 guys in the league that you can say that about than Smart, but Smart was coming off injury. Holiday's worlds better as an offensive player and makes sense as a full-time point guard. But Robert Williams was the only other guy on the Celtics outside of Brown and Tatum, especially, who can get out and run. But Robert Williams was the guy sitting down in the dunker spot playing above the rim. Porzingis doesn't do that. They don't have that on this roster anymore. True. And Drew Holiday, while an excellent defender, is, again, I don't think he's the same dog type of player that Marcus Smart is, where Smart wants to be the bad guy. He wants to get under the other team's skin. He wants to ruffle feathers. And Robert Williams was kind of leaning into that through his shot blocking. I don't want to call the Celtics soft because I think it's too early to say that, but I look up and down this roster and I see a lot of really good players. I see a team that is going to be better offensively, and I get really, really scared to see this team run up against somebody who's loaded with dogs, whether it's like New York, Cleveland's, going to play really physical this year. Miami, if they survive that far, are going to bring that chip. And there's going to be other teams out there who really just take on that tough guy mentality. And I think Boston traded that away this offseason, and I'm a little bit concerned about it. I don't really believe in the depth outside of their top 7 guys. This is no disrespect to Sam Hauser, O'Shea Brissett, Luke Cornett. We'll see what they get out of Lamar Stevens, who showed some flashes in Cleveland, but I think they're like 7-8 deep, and you're talking about some guys in Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis who have had catastrophic injuries before. Al Horford, how long can he continue to be a starting caliber player? At some point, the answer is going to be not anymore. So, yeah, tons of talent. Derek White remains. Peyton Pritchard is going to be back in the rotation. That is a good thing overall. But
Derek White, I thought, was going to be a member of that trade. When I heard that he was, and I thought that was a big deal for Boston to keep him.
I'm surprised that Portland took Malcolm Brogdon instead of Derek White, but it sounds like they wanted Brogdon's leadership. And it's tough for Brogdon, who specifically wanted to go to Boston, again, to chase a ring. And now he's got to go back to a situation like he was at in Indiana, where he's going to be a mentor, and maybe he gets moved to a contender. But yeah, I don't know. I think Boston is the same at best, but they might actually be slightly worse. And that's going to be a hot take for a lot of people who are excited about Holiday. And you should be excited about Drew Holiday coming in.
So number 3 last year was Philadelphia, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I think they're worse. Mm-hmm. I think it's hard to argue. I wanted to say the same, and I wanted to slightly think better if the James Harden thing can go away, like they're desperately trying to. Before we get to it, did you see the news that was sort of being reported with Stephen A. Smith that he heard last week with James Harden?
I had not sseen that yet.
So James Harden apparently over the summer was in discussions with the Houston Rockets to come back. So Ime Udoka comes over there, right, to Houston, and they had some discussion in the summer as to whether or not they wanted to be able to come back. And according to Stephen A. Smith, they were ready to basically offer him a 4-year max deal in Houston. But James Harden said the wrong things in the discussion, including talking about wanting to come back to be the NBA scoring champ. And apparently, Ime Udoka and company were like, no, this is not what we're trying to do here in Houston. But you can keep my number, just don't use it. Man, this James Harden fella, I don't know, man. Listen, I defend. Apparently, I'm defending numbers when I defend James Harden. I can't defend him anymore. Like it's revolvers to the big toe all the time with him. So
that's a great way of putting it.
Double
guns too. It's not just a single revolver. It's
I don't see how you can look at Philadelphia and not think that their window slammed shut. And maybe prematurely because they've not been able to at least get rid of one giant albatross right now.
A giant albatross who was productive for them last year, and if he would just get his head out of his rear end, would have still been able to play a meaningful role on this team. But it's still the season was going to hinge on 2 things. Joel Embiid staying healthy, which it always does. There's nothing new there. And Tyrese Maxey continuing to develop on this steep curve that he's been on and actually surpassing James Harden's productivity this year. Maxey needed to be the better player than Harden. And last year, they were probably about even-ish. Harden did play really well, and Maxey played well overall. But Maxey needed to become a legit second wheel. If he can do that this year, and Embiid is fully healthy, the supporting cast, Tobias Harris, PJ Tucker, Patrick Beverley, DeAnthony Melton, Kelly Oubre comes over, who is capable of giving you 20 points a game. It's not terrible. Like they've got some good bodies. They've got some depth. I think they upgrade coaching-wise and getting Nick Nurse, who's going to be really creative as long as the players buy in. It's going to be a lot more creative than Doc Rivers, a fresh voice in the locker room. I think all of that is good. And so the Sixers, if they get 10 cents on the dollar for James Harden, which is probably the way this is going to go in the end, if they get anything at all, and it's going to be a huge distraction, if they get anything at all, it's not as if Philly's going to miss the playoffs. And I don't think they're down into play-in territory. I think they're probably still in the top 6, but it's going to be tenuous at best. And I don't see a way where James Harden suddenly has a change of heart, decides to grow up, realizes that he has an opportunity to legitimately chase a conference title, chase a ring, reset the narrative, and then be able to leave next year when he's washed some of the stink off himself again. He's not going to do that. So there isn't a scenario where you see James Harden in this lineup and Maxey's the number 2 wheel. Harden still believes that he can be the scoring champ in the NBA. Are you freaking kidding me? Like, there again, that is such a huge red flag, not only for a Rockets team that's young, loaded with scoring, brings in Fred VanVleet, all that other stuff. It is, again, the machinations of a player who is past his prime and won't and can't accept that. And that is what we have seen from Harden demanding these trades. It's what you and I talked about last week. It is absolutely the Carmelo Anthony, Allen Iverson stage of the career where you either turn this around like Carmelo did, like Vince Carter did, and you look yourself in the mirror and realize the phone ain't ringing the way that it was before, or you go out like Allen Iverson for 3-4 seasons that everyone wants to forget because it's not who you were, but it's who you became, and you were never James Harden again.
Yeah, I don't know how much more I can say about, honestly, James Harden. You either defend the numbers or you demonize the head on the shoulders that sort of put himself in this position. So I'll just say this: like I thought Philadelphia's team, if James Harden had essentially said, "I'm never coming back to play for this guy again," even though apparently he's going to show up for camp.
Which he'll show up and half-ass it conspicuously and get kicked out of practice on the second day. We've seen this game before with these guys.
Yeah, I just don't see how that can't hurt you because look, Patrick Beverley's on this team, Danny Green's on this team, and none of them. Tyrese, I love Tyrese Maxey, and I've loved him since he came in from Kentucky. Obviously you got the MVP and Joel Embiid. This team just can't get out of its own way one way or the other. Like, it seems like that they're snake bit for one reason or the other, and it is really hard to see. It's hard to see where the good can come from because they did it a controversial way with all of the continuous tanking. Well, I mean, think of
trust the process. It's karma, right?
But what's there now from all that tanking, right? Like, it's not like they reaped all the exactly. It's not like they reaped all this great rewards from it overall. It's
I will say this: like, PJ Tucker and Patrick Beverley played with James Harden in Houston. It sounds like they still have a good relationship. I don't know if that's true, but James Harden better count his lucky stars that he shows up to practice with two guys who he has that prior existing relationship with. Because if it was somebody else and you show up onto a team with Patrick Beverley and PJ Tucker, they would absolutely punk you in practice and embarrass you regardless of who you were. But I don't know if they do that to James Harden because, Daryl Morey has been trying to bring back former Rockets conspicuously. Daniel House is on this team too. It's a little bit ridiculous because Beverly and PJ Tucker obviously passed their sell-by dates. But yeah, the supporting cast was going to be good. I really love the Oubre signing, especially for the price that they got. It's a 20-point per game scorer for less than $3 million a year. DeAnthony Melton was a fantastic find for them off of Memphis's roster. So there's talent here, and that's why I don't think they go away completely. If Tyrese Maxey can be a legit number 2, we know Tobias Harris can be a 3 on some nights, shouldn't be your second best option, but he can be your third best on some nights, and on the nights he can't, you pray that Kelly Oubre is on. So they're worse, but not monumentally. But again, this is a team with the MVP that should be chasing a title, not chasing a playoff spot versus the play-in berth.
Yeah. Speaking of a team that no longer chasing, the playoff berths, the Cleveland Cavaliers, they were the 4 seed last year. And of course, Joel, would you like for me to tell you what happened in their first round matchup of the playoffs last year? Do you remember?
Well, it was 2 tough teams that were going to be really physical, and the New York Knicks just did it better. Just flat out did it better. Yep,
Tom Thibodeau choked out Cleveland by winning like 50-30 every game. Sweet, sweet basketball happening there. The sweetest of basketball. Anyway, the Cleveland Cavaliers, Joel, are they betterer, lesser, gooder, or mostly the samer?
I think they're slightly better. You get a full training camp with Donovan Mitchell. Another one, you get a little bit more development out of young guys like Isaac Okoro and Evan Mobley. Big time for me is them bringing over Max Strus. Strus is talking about being a starter there. I don't know if defensively that's going to change things for them, but having another knockdown shooter and really a specialist, they had guys who were supposed to be specialists last year, but really have not been able to fill that. And they didn't just get Strus. They got George Niang off of the Philadelphia 76ers, who will be a lower minute specialist for them. But it means that you're not worrying about whether Karis LeVert is being streaky, which he typically is, or that Isaac Okoro still hasn't developed an outside jump shot, which he hasn't. You have some constants from three-point land, and it allows guys like Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell that much more room to drive, to play the pick and pop game, to knock down threes themselves. But I think it also opens up the inside for Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. The big question, though, is toughness and psyche-wise for this Cavaliers team. They were a tough regular season team, a physical team, a massive front line, and they had done that for a couple of years. They got exposed by the Knicks, who, like I said, just did it better. Is Cleveland going to come back and say, okay, well, I guess we're just not tough guys. We are a good basketball team and we'll lean into that? Or are they going to come back with a chip on their shoulder that says, nah, we're going to meet you in the alleyway again, and we're going to go round two on this? Whether it's against the Knicks in the regular season, they see them in the playoffs, but there's going to be other teams, like I said before. Miami might be tough. Philly might have to play kind of a grinded out physical style with no James Harden. There's going to be other strong teams in the Eastern Conference. But Cleveland, I think, can really set themselves apart as the other tough guy team besides the Knicks. If the Heat really are that depleted this year, there's a huge opportunity for them. I think roster-wise, they're more talented, but the toughness is going to come from that front line and from Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland about how they set the tone and what they want the identity of this team to ultimately be.
I'll be brief with Cleveland because I think they're right about the same. I mean, I like Max Strus, like you do, but I don't think he's a game changer for them. I do think he helps, but I don't think it makes you. I don't think it necessarily keeps you in the top four in the East, but I don't think it prevents you from being in the top four either. The East is top heavy. Top heavy. And we're really talking about the teams we've already talked about, the first two mainly. So the rest is just going to be up for battle. One way or the other, to be able to get to the semis and maybe to the finals against one of those two teams, depending on how things end up working out this year. So I think Cleveland's right around the same, which is, to me, I think a lot to sort of be expected from this team. Because I don't think Cleveland's sort of that destination free agent wise that you're looking at this last offseason. And there wasn't a ton of, I think, big moves that could be had for them to make them that much better. So
plus the core is set, right? I mean, they just got the core together. It's young. You got one season.
Look, I told you how much I love Mobley coming out of the draft. I thought Mobley was the guy in the draft. And so I thought that was the hugest of huge things for Cleveland to be able to get there. So I think that they're just ready to keep building. This isn't a team ready to decline. They're just a team ready to get their wheels underneath them and start running.
The East, I think, is more wide open this year than people realize. Milwaukee's going to be there. But like I said, Boston is one catastrophic injury to Porzingis away from being way too shallow on the front line.
Well, I'll tell you,
and Philly's going to take a step back.
Yeah, and I don't want to. We re-adjudicate Boston and stuff when we start talking about predictions.
Yeah,
but like Porzingis, I went back and looked at it. He's not as hurt as we sort of think he is. Like he still plays 55, 60 games roughly a year, kind of thing. I think last year he played like 65 games or something, which still it's not the best of shakes, right? Like you want your guy to be able to play 75 games or something like that plus in a season, but. I'd always sort of thought Kristaps Porzingis is missing like 60 games every year that he's been in the league. And it's really like 25 or 30 or 20 to 30-ish, which still is not great. It's a quarter of the season. But, I mean, I'm also looking at the glass half, formerly New York Knicks Porzingis. So,
right. And
I'm attached to a guy that everybody booed when he was drafted. So,
segueing into the Knicks here, because I'll ask you first. What I was saying with Cleveland is I think the top three is open. Outside of Milwaukee, I think there's two open spots to be in that top three in the East, whereas the last couple seasons we had locked Boston and Philly in there no matter what. Cleveland has a shot at the top three. I also think the New York Knicks have a shot at the top three, but I want to hear from you whether you think a quiet offseason, but with the development of this team and relatively young, I have to imagine you think they're in better position than they were at this time last year, right?
I do. I do because of the stability of the franchise, which is not something the Knicks have been known for in the last 20 years or so. So it's nice to sort of see that stability to be there. I think you're really only talking about a couple of extensions really in the offseason. And Dante DiVincenzo got a 4-year deal. See, Josh Hart, did he get the extension? Yeah, he got the 4-year extension.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking over here on some of these tickers here. So I think this team now I'll say this. This team is set up to be able to play Tom Thibodeau basketball just about as well as you're going to do it in today's NBA.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
do worry if he's not the guy going forward to Tom Thibodeau, like what this roster, the overhaul might look like in the cleaning up. But even if not, there's a really good young core here with, and I should say young, the guys are just continuing to get, older and older. You got 4 or 5 years in the league now. But I loved from day one, and I feel like I get to brag about this. Some of the guys I remember coming out of college that I loved. I loved Emmanuel Quickly coming out of
Mm-hmm.
college. I thought he was going to be superb. Um, I'll tell you this. I quietly am optimistic about this year because I do sort of. When I started got the message about Drew Holiday going to Boston, because what it looked like was going to happen was for like a few hours was that thing we talked about on our last podcast about the Clippers being involved with the 3-team trade. You're like, oh, well, we literally just talked about that. And then half a second later, Drew Holiday's in Boston. You're like, oh, God, what? I hope he took Jaylen Brown with him or something. But it was not the case. I do believe that the Knicks have a real good shot at the top 3 with you. I think it would be a disappointment to me if they weren't hosting first round, if they weren't in the top 4.
Yeah.
Anything above that would be sort of hoping for the most possible out of that. But I think the Knicks are in as good positions they've been in since Melo left, honestly.
They're 10 deep, which we did say last year, but it's 10 deep of guys that are square in their prime. Every single one of these guys is either like right on the cusp of his prime or square in it, as you said. And I really liked what you said. To be able to play Tom Thibodeau basketball in the modern NBA,
it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, Tibbs has allowed them, at least if he stays consistent with what he did last year. He's not playing 7-8 guys. It's a 10-man rotation. They're allowed to shoot threes. They push the pace a little bit more. As long as you defend on the other end and play physical on the glass, and as long as you really take care of the basketball and cut down on turnovers, those have always been huge Tibbs, those have been pillars of what he does, and they're good pillars. It's just that he did that to the exclusion of everything else you need in the modern NBA. But based on what we saw last year, I do think this is a great roster for him. DiVincenzo is a guy who not only handles the ball, but can knock down shots. I love Josh Hart as much as any role player in the NBA. I just think he is one of the ultimate glue guys. Does this really still come down to when is the leap from RJ Barrett? Good, solid player. Does he become the legit second wheel on this team, or is it still Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson? I think you can get away with that even if Barrett doesn't, because the rest of the cast is so good. But there were certain nights where Barrett, you saw all of the potential, and other nights where he sat early and maybe sat for longer because somebody else was just doing better than him. And I think we're at the point in RJ Barrett's career where he's got to be good enough that Tom Thibodeau cannot take him off the floor, that he cannot afford to get Barrett out the same way that young Jimmy Butler or young Luol Deng, and I'm not asking for Tibbs to like run Barrett into the ground and shorten his career, but there were certain Tibbs guys that like, they were so reliable, so gritty that he wouldn't even think about pulling them. And Barrett's got to get to that point, even if he's not the third offensive wheel.
Yeah, I think, and then we can move on. I think RJ Barrett has to make that leap this year. I agree with you. He's got to do it consistently. He has not been able to be consistently out on the court and trusted by Tom Thibodeau. But this team, you mentioned, I mean, Jalen Brunson, we just mentioned as a half thought there. It's still obviously a part of this roster, was the big acquisition last year. And let's not forget the poor man's MVP, Julius Randle, still in this team.
Mm-hmm.
And this roster is littered with dudes that are getting legitimate playing time that you might not consider, like Mitchell Robinson. Like no one's talking about Mitchell Robinson. He's getting tons of minutes, tons.
Mm-hmm.
He's getting good minutes. He's getting good minutes to be able to play as a big man. So I think New York is in as good a position as they've been in a long time to be able to be sustainable for an entire season and then make that deep run and not be hoping and just having me sort of have my fingers crossed as we go into playoff run. But listen, I have playoffs 2 of the last 3 years. I'm lucky Larry over here. The Brooklyn Nets, they were 6th last year. Joel, the Brooklyn Nets were clearly much better. Yes.
I think they're same in that the 6th seed is still within reach for them. It's a very different team. It's a lot of wings, but Mikal Bridges is that good. We saw that in FIBA. We saw that during the playoffs last year. Are they going to get all-star caliber Ben Simmons back? I don't know if that player will ever exist again, but if Ben Simmons can at least be starting caliber Ben Simmons, that changes a lot for this team, which is built to be a really interesting, difficult team on certain nights because they are just loaded with wings. And they're wings that do a lot of different things, but also jack of all trades type of guys. Dorian Finney-Smith and Royce O'Neal. I love what they bring defensively. Cam Johnson, I think, is going to take a big leap for them offensively now that he's going to be a featured guy for a full season. Their depth isn't great, but Nick Claxton has shown that he's a solid starter in the NBA. Spencer Dinwiddie still has something left in the tank. Lonnie Walker showed a few flashes in LA. But this is one of those teams, kind of like the Washington Wizards over the last couple of years, and there's one of those teams every year where if they get off to a slow start, they get some injuries, they run into issues by the trade deadline. This is a prime team to get blown up, picked apart, send these good players to contending teams, bring back picks, start all over again if you're the Brooklyn Nets. But if they're healthy, if they play together, I think being right around that fringe of the play-in versus the playoffs, the 6 through 8 seed feels about right for these guys.
I think so too. And let me tell you this. You ready for my hot take of the podcast? It comes 37 minutes in.
Let's do it.
Are you ready for this? It is regarding these Brooklyn Nets, who I never wanted to talk about again, but it does become my big hot take. Here we go. Hot take. Ben Simmons comes back as the All-Star Ben Simmons this year. This is the year it happens. And I'll tell you why. We're a couple years removed from really the back injury being the big issue here.
Mm-hmm.
2, no one's talking about Ben Simmons right now. I think a lot of that got into his head in Philadelphia. I think the Philadelphia fans got brutal with him.
And which is really off character for them. I mean, that's just really off brand for Philly fans.
But not only that, the national media would not stop lambasting this kid for like the better part of a year and a half. Mm-hmm. And not that it's not undeserved, but like you're talking about, all the way from the end of the playoffs a couple of years ago where he refused to basically take a layup shot in a game. And then the back injury and whether or not he was going to show up to camp. Did the back injury really, was it there? Why did he have a cell phone in his pocket while he was walking around in training camp? I think he has his come to Jesus time this summer. No one's talking about him. He has the chance to sort of mentally get back to what they thought he was coming out of LSU. And I think this is the year we see Ben Simmons come back to Ben Simmons. There's no attention on Brooklyn. There's no attention on Ben Simmons right now. There's just a chance to get back and play basketball. And I think that's going to be good for him.
I'll tell you what, the Subway Series remains fun in New York. It's going to be a fun one this year and might even be the best iteration we've seen of it. Yeah.
And listen, I'll tell you this. For as much as people are like New York, it's a tough market. Nobody in New York cares about Brooklyn and the Nets. They don't. They don't. It's a Knicks town when it comes to basketball. Period. End of story.
Mm-hmm.
People inside that arena are still Knicks talking fan over and over again. So that's my hot take. Ben Simmons comes back to the guy who's averaging like 14 and 9 a game or something this year. And I don't know if he'll make an all-star game. I can't predict that because who knows. But I think we'll see him come back in strong form this year. All right. See, who was number 7 last year? The Hawks. Oh, man. Sweet Georgia Brown. They are not that. They are Joel, can I start with Atlanta?
Yeah, go for it.
I just don't see it. I just don't see it with Atlanta. I know Patty Mills being a part of this roster is now for long term is fine, I guess. I feel like ever since they got white hot, like January a couple years ago through the playoffs, they made every wrong move possible for them. A couple of them we probably agreed with, but ended up being wrong for them.
Mm-hmm.
I can't figure out the mental state of this team. Can't figure out how well these guys congeal together as a team. So I can't possibly put myself in a position to think they're anywhere near better. So I'll be I'll be generous, and I'll also be ginger and give them a lukewarm same, maybe.
This isn't, I mean, qualifying necessarily as a hot take, but I'll say that they're slightly better in that you get rid of the John Collins distraction. You set up this team to now play 4 out. They're going to start Sadiq Bey most likely, along with DeAndre Hunter, DeJounte Murray, and Trae Young at your guards. And that allows you to put Clint Capella still in the middle, or Onyeka Okongwu, who I think is going to supplant Capella as the starter before too long. May even be on opening night. AJ Griffin showed some flashes last year. Jalen Johnson showed some flashes. I think Patty Mills is cooked. I don't think there's anything left in the tank there, but if he can
he's got 4 years, sir. You can't
if
give
he
a guy.
Can be a good veteran and a good voice and occasionally hit a 3, he'll do his job.
That's right. He can put the chairs away at the end of the game. Yeah.
But Bogdan Bogdanovic is coming off of a fantastic FIBA, and I think the big reason that I can semi-confidently say I think they're better slightly, to the point that they won't be in the play, and I think they will likely be top 6, is that now you get a full training camp with Quinn Snyder. That is a big deal. Quinn Snyder is a system-type coach. He has more than won his share of regular season games in Utah. And those guys knew how to play, and I think a lot of the pieces are there in Atlanta to be able to do the same thing. And Snyder is good at coaching to his roster and creating the system around what he has. So I think they're better just because Nate McMillan had kind of run his course, and Nate McMillan is not known as an innovator. I think he caught lightning in a bottle with that team, and then it was gone just as quickly. So addition by subtraction, in moving John Collins, who isn't a terrible player, but just didn't fit there maybe personality-wise and even system-wise, and Snyder coming in, maybe they bump up 1 or 2 spots in the standings, win 3-4 extra games than last year, so slightly better.
The 8th seed last year was the Miami Heat. I don't know if they did anything really last year, but despite all of the Damian will he, won't he, will Tyler Herro be gone for him, won't he, will he, won't he, they're essentially the same roster as last year, just a little bit older.
And minus Max Strus, which is monumental to me.
Sure. Max Strus was a big deal in a couple of games, especially for them in the playoffs specifically. But I like to say worse, slightly. But every time I try to think badly at all about Miami, they either end up the 1 seed or they end up playing the 1 seed for the championship. So I'm not going to completely do this to Emo Butler, but I am definitely thinking slightly worse.
I'm there with you. Could be massively worse, but Miami practices witchcraft. We know that. There's no other explanation for how this is working. But there's so much riding on this. Tyler Herro has to come back healthy, has to be playing near an all-star level. Kevin Love has to be able to hold down 20 plus minutes a night. That was questionable during the playoffs.
Very questionable.
Kyle Lowry comes back as a starter because Gabe Vincent is gone.
Yeah, he's 30. Kyle Lowry's 37, by the way.
I love Kyle
having
Lowry,
to be one of your big starters.
But here, I mean, if I'm RJ Hampton, who's bounced around the league, but really was a high-touted prospect before he went to Australia and played a year there, if I'm RJ Hampton, I'm chomping at the bit here to be the next Miami Heat reclamation project type guy who comes in and does big things, because I think he could be in line for something like that. We know Bam's going to be good, and we know Jimmy Butler is going to give everything he has, even as the clock keeps ticking. I don't know which Caleb Martin is the real Caleb Martin. Is it the guy who had the phenomenal series against Boston, or the guy who crashed back down to earth by the end of the playoffs and was decent during the regular season? Does Duncan Robinson move back into a rotation level guy, or just a specialist like a a change-up pitcher, a relief pitcher, which is kind of what he was playing last year because Strus had played Robinson out of a job, and Robinson was the guy who got the big contract originally in Miami. Can Miami, get Thomas Bryant healthy and make him productive? Yes. Are they going to find one diamond in the rough off that bench at least? Yes, they've done that. Is that going to be enough? I don't think so. Unless, again, Hero, Butler, and Adebayo are all at all-star caliber level. You got a big three, and the supporting cast, Josh Richardson, has a bounce-back year. He's been down for a long time, but he comes back to Miami where he had his best years. Never put it past Spo, never put it past those guys, but I don't see how on paper right now we can responsibly say they're better or same.
That's right. And this is a responsible podcast, okay? We don't recklessly say things like Ben Simmons is going to be a good player again. We don't just recklessly throw that out there. Just on the outside, technically, of the 8, even though they were in the play-in, the Toronto Raptors, a pretty quiet offseason except for shoring up a couple of guys.
Why are you going to do the Chicago Bulls like that?
Did I miss the Chicago Bulls?
Yeah.
Oh, I guess they did get kind of,
I mean, I know they were an afterthought, but don't make them a literal afterthought.
Didn't the Raptors technically get the 9 seed? I mean, not that that's a seed, really, but I thought it was the Raptors and the Bulls. Because
I guess. I was looking at regular season standings, but...
Oh, not the play-in stuff. Okay, I got you. Okay, yeah. So yeah. So we'll finish with the Raptors, then we'll do the Bulls, because then we're going to rapid-fire some of these, unless we think somewhere, because this is... that's what I'm saying about them.
It gets down to some stuff.
Okay, so the Raptors, essentially, the big moves they made: Jalen McDaniels 2-year deal, Dennis Schroeder gets a 2-year deal. Oh, Jakob, yeah, I'm doing Jakob. Jakob, 4-year deal. I don't even remember that happening. A lot happened when I guess we weren't doing the podcast, so that may have been before. Regardless, Toronto Raptors getting themselves ready for 2023 and into 2024. Better, worse, same.
It's going to be difficult to say. You can't say that they're better when you lose Fred VanVleet. Can you say that they're same despite losing Fred VanVleet? There's the possibility for that. I mean, Schroeder lost a lot of luster in the NBA, but the Dennis Schroeder that I saw in LA last year and the Schroeder that I saw during FIBA is a guy who has the light bulb fully on about who he is, what he's good at, what his limitations are, and what it takes to run an NBA team. And that was really the knock on Schroeder before this, both in Atlanta and then as he began to bounce around, is he wasn't always honest with himself about limitations. He'd kind of overextend himself. So I don't think he's a terrible starting point guard option. Is he as good as Fred VanVleet, who became a cult hero there? No, but Scotty Barnes, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Chris Boucher, Precious Achiuwa, Jalen McDaniels, those young guys who have a lot of talent, there's no question about that, are all now a year older, but you lose Nick Nurse as your coach, so you lose some of the creative mad scientist stuff that made Toronto competitive even when it was kind of up in the air. The bench still makes me a little bit nervous. Gary Trent moves back to a supporting role, which is probably better for him. Malachi Flynn, I'm still not convinced as a backup caliber point guard, like a true second stringer. I think he's more of a third. We'll see what they get out of Grady Dick this year. Christian Koloko, we'll see what they get out of him. Some prospects that are waiting in the wings. So I think Toronto has the potential to be same, but I'll put them slightly further back. I think they are slightly worse than last year just because you lose some of that Nick Nurse magic and that Fred VanVleet identity to this team, and it's no knock on Schroeder. I think some of these guys are going to be legitimately better, but this might be one of those teams again, like we talked about with Brooklyn, where if things really go south, don't go the way that they wanted, Toronto could be a team that gets picked apart at the deadline.
Yeah, I don't have much on Toronto because I don't think Toronto's going to be very good this year. But I've very rarely been proven to be wrong on this podcast, so I will just put my record out there and to say probably take it to the bank. I don't think that they're going to be past, let's say, February battling for playoff seeding, although they're really? Trying to give everybody a shot at it. But I think there's a real shot, like you say, that they end up getting picked apart at the trade deadline for a couple of pieces, just because I don't think they're going to be great. Great. I don't think they're going to be good. I think they're going to be bad. Speaking of bad or disappointing, at least going into the playoffs, or the play-in, was the Chicago Bulls, and how they ended up their season. Where I guess they forgot what day the play-in game was that
My
they had.
goodness, did they ever?
Oh man. I'll start with Chicago. I think Chicago is literally the same. I think it's the same overall team. I think what we have done on this podcast is try to pump up Chicago, thinking that they have a shot to be something. And granted, injuries have got them a couple of years ago, and I do get that. But I do think since then, this has been kind of an underperforming, underwhelming team. And I think at some point you got to put that on the coach's shoulders too, and you got to start thinking, is this the right fellow for the job? So I didn't see anything in the offseason that made me think that they were going to be much better this year. So this will be another very generous, not the same, probably battling maybe for the last play-in spot, and that's about it.
Yeah, because even though Zach LaVine still has some upside left, he's getting to that point where what he is what he is.
That's true.
And for whatever, improvements that him and Ayo Dosunmu and Patrick Williams make, Alex Caruso is still young, Kobe White makes. DeMar DeRozan isn't going to get better. Nick Vucevic isn't necessarily going to get better. I like the bringing in of Torrey Craig and Javon Carter. Those are both helpful veteran guys. Andre Drummond is a good rotation guy. I think the depth overall is better on this Bulls team than it has been the last couple of years, where we said, oh yeah, the starting lineup is nice, but Lord help you if you have to go into that bench with injuries. And that's what they've had. So I think they're legit 10 deep of guys who will come in and do their job. But you're right. If they're still in the fringe and they're still underwhelming and disappointing, this falls squarely on Billy Donovan, who had made his reputation, especially in Oklahoma City, about being able to make something out of nothing and, really maximize his guys. That's not going on anymore. And you can't, as catastrophic as it is, we can't keep going back to no Lonzo Ball. You just have to accept that he's not there. Somebody else has to step up. That hasn't necessarily happened. So yeah, I feel they're probably about the same, which is right in that dreaded no man's land of good enough to sort of compete, but not get a good draft pick. And that's it. So I wish they were better. I like this Bulls group. We all see what they could be. We all see what they could have been. This just feels like one of those teams that's never going to get there.
Yeah, in Chicago, he's 31-41. Billy Donovan is 46-36, which is 21-22, and then 40-42. And this is a team that went and got the guy who finished second or third in the West with OKC. The year before. So it's got to be one of those put up or shut up kind of years. Like, you got to show some kind of progression, and being at the bottom of the play-in's not the progression that Chicago is looking for. It may be getting them back up to the level where they can then start to build upon for the next fella, but only the Lord knows at this point, to be honest with you. The Indiana Pacers, is that who's next on your list?
That's it. Yeah.
Bruce Brown agrees to a 2-year deal. Tyrese Halliburton does the 5-year extension. And the New York Knicks send Obi Toppin his way, or their way, should say. I think Indiana is better. I think they're better this year. And I think, first of all, getting Tyrese Halliburton to do the extension, big deal. And I think Obi Toppin's a really good piece for them. And this is a team that should be battling for the top end of the play in, not the bottom end, and maybe even get one of those guaranteed spots at number 6. I think last year was a tough year for them, and so I think they're a better team this year. I think we'll see them in the playoffs.
Yeah, Tyrese Halliburton continues to develop. It's not a fluke. The numbers last year were not, I'm on a bad team, that's why I'm getting my numbers. We saw during FIBA, Halliburton is as good as he is, and that's got to make Pacers fans rejoice, because Miles Turner is still a solid starter. Ben Mathurin showed a lot of potential last year. Yeah, there were rough edges. Is he more than just a scorer? We'll see. But you bring in a defensive specialist like Bruce Brown to go in that starting lineup, along with Halliburton, who's a solid defender, Turner, who's an elite shot blocker. Obi Toppin's going to get his chance to start. Yeah, he's going to have to battle Jarris Walker, who they just drafted, and the Pacers are really high on. So that's going to be a really interesting power forward timeshare. But my goodness, is it athletic? And so if you get Toppin and Mathurin running with Halliburton throwing lobs to those guys, you got Miles Turner playing trailer. You got TJ McConnell, who's one of the best table setting, backup point guards in the league. You still have a flame throwing 3-point shooter in Buddy Hield. Andrew Nembhard might be a solid rotation guy. Same thing with Aaron Nesmith. I think Jalen Smith can do that too. We'll see what they get out of Jarris Walker this year. I look at this Pacers team as deep, and honestly, outside of Milwaukee, I don't know of an Eastern Conference team, especially those that we've talked about, that's poised for a bigger jump than the Pacers. I think this may be the team in the East that is legitimately far better than they were last year. And maybe that'll be my hot take for the day. Like Milwaukee should be there. They should win way more than 58 games. And I think the East is down a little bit, but New York and Cleveland are going to fill whatever vacuum is there from Boston and Philly. And Boston may still wind up being just as good. We'll see. But Indiana, I think, is going to be sniffing around that top 6 all year and is going to be a dangerous team if they're in the play-in for sure.
Same record as them is the next team we're going to talk about, the Washington Wizards. And the Washington Wizards, Joel, in the offseason were, in a word, active. They were active in this offseason. Danilo Gallinari, Tyus Jones, and Mike Muscala got in a 3-team trade with the Grizzlies and the Seas. I don't want to say the full team name. I hate them. Taj Gibson's back. Kyle Kuzma's back. Jordan Poole, Patrick Baldwin, and Ryan Rollins get a trade with the Warriors. Andrew Shamet is on this team. This is a team that was better than a lot of people expected early on last year and definitely faded, especially when, we don't really have to talk about last
year. They just didn't have the depth. They did not have the depth. We said it all year.
It wasn't sustainable for them to be able to do that. But this year, this is another candidate for me for a team that's going to be battling for a playoff spot. I think this is a good play-in candidate for Washington this year. How many games did they finish out the play-in last year? Let me look. They were
just a couple.
They were a full 5 games back from even competing for one of the last play-in spots. So I think this team has got the goods to be able to make a jump to contend for the play-in spot to the last weekend.
Somebody like Washington, Toronto, maybe even Miami, you got to be looking over your shoulder a little bit because I think Washington has a really interesting roster. Does it have enough top-end talent? No, because I don't think Jordan Poole or Kyle Kuzma are legitimately first or even second wheels in the NBA. I think they're both probably third wheels. But you got a bunch of guys in Tyus Jones, Denny Avdia, Corey Kispert even, Shamet. They can play, and it's going to be a sum of its part type of team. And if they're healthy and they execute well, and they're going to need one or two other teams above them, to fall down, Washington's got a chance to be a play-in team. And I do think they probably supplant somebody like Toronto, maybe even Miami. And we'll see where Chicago is by the time this is all said and done. Brooklyn could be a team that underachieves and is blown up. So yeah, I'm okay with what Washington did. The Bradley Beal era had run its course. There was no doubt about that. And I will tune into Wizards games. I'm legitimately interested to see how
early this year, I'll check them out. Yeah.
We'll see how that top 8 fits together, because on paper, they've got everything they need. It's just not top line guys that you need to go deep in the playoffs.
Orlando Magic is the next team on the list. And, granted, they were 34-48 last year, 24 games back of first place, but more importantly, they were 6 games back of competing for the play-in. I think they got Joe Ingles in the offseason, right? Joe Ingles agrees to a 2-year deal. Mac McClung. So I don't love Orlando where they are right now, but if you're going to say that they're worse, what are they last? Like in the East? I don't think
34 wins was a big jump for them from where they had been the last few years of only 20 wins, in a lot of those seasons.
And I think at the end of the last season, they went on a little bit of a run that sort of shocked a few people that they were able to be as good as they were near the end, and that they cared nearly as much at the end, and they were just trying to find themselves in a better draft spot. I think Orlando maybe about the same. I think they overachieved at the end of last year, so the number's going to be a little inflated. So I think they may be a little worse win-loss wise. But I think a 30-35 win team is probably what this team is set up to be. I don't have much faith in them, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
I think they can be slightly better if Paolo Banchero is able to capitalize off the experience he had at FIBA, and if he continues his trajectory. I mean, we saw he's a legit guy. Is he a number one option in the NBA? We don't know yet. It's way too early. But Franz Wagner absolutely can play. They've got other guys who've shown they can play, but how good are they? And this is where Orlando has perpetually been with its young guys. Jonathan Isaac showed he could play before the massive injury. Wendell Carter has shown he's a rotation level big, but is he a starting caliber big? We still don't know. Rookie Anthony Black, how does he fit? Markelle Fultz, a reclamation project. Cole Anthony, rotation level guy, yes, but is he as your starting caliber point guard on this team with all this other talent, drafted talent? Jalen Suggs didn't get a fair shake at it last year because of injury. There's just so many, even Chuma Okeke, who we love a lot, he's going to get his minutes, but where does he fit? Is he a backup to Banchero? Is he behind Jonathan Isaac? Do they move Wendell Carter or Goga Batadze, or Moritz Wagner? Like, there's talent here. We've been saying this about the Magic for years. There is talent here. How does it fit together, and who are actually the guys outside of Banchero and Wagner who are those guys building blocks, or are they just solid NBA starters? We just don't know. And that's why I can say maybe slightly better, but you're talking about like 3-4 wins advancement if they're slightly better. So I think same is probably realistic here. But man, so much young talent. If all of a sudden the stars align, like they've been drafting high for years. It's there. It's on the roster.
The last two teams, Charlotte Hornets, Miles Bridges has signed a contract, LaMelo Ball, multi-year extension, Frank Ntilikina, forget it. I'll forget trying to say that ever again, even though he was a sweetheart of a New York Knick for a while. PJ Washington agrees to an extension for them. That's that's a franchise that's in a bit of a disarray on and off the court. I don't know honestly what to say about Charlotte. So much depends on health for this team to even be, highlight worthy, paying attention to. You know what I mean? And if LaMelo is okay, right? You got highlight moments. You got some opportunities to pay attention to the team.
And a few big wins along the way. Yep.
I don't think that there's much else out there for this team right now.
Gordon Hayward has not stayed healthy. He has shown that it's not possible at this stage of his career. He can give you something when he's on the floor, but he's not on the floor enough. Miles Bridges coming back from the legal issues, entire years off for guys where they're away from the team, where they're out of the NBA and it's not injury related, they're not rehabbing, have typically not been kind to players. They don't come back the same way that they were. There's momentum loss. So I would not look at Miles Bridges and go, oh, he was an all-star caliber guy or fringe all-star caliber guy. He's going to be back at that level as soon as he's on the floor for Charlotte. That's not a given.
He's rested. He's got fresh legs. Come on now.
Terry Rozier is a guy that I think Rozier is a fantastic sixth man. I think he's overcast as a starter and especially as a key starter. Brandon Miller, who they took at second, I don't know. We're going to find out as he continues to get reps. Mark Williams, Nick Richards, same thing. This team didn't have depth last year. It didn't have depth the year before it. They don't have it again. They've got some young guys, but every single player outside of maybe LaMelo Ball feels like they're being asked to do too much. They're being relied upon to do too much. And I cannot believe that they brought back Steve Clifford. I don't have a problem with Clifford as a coach overall, but I do for this team. He had a shot with the Hornets. It was underwhelming. To bring him back with a young group didn't make any sense. To have him back still, this team probably is worse. Even if they're healthy, they're probably worse. They might be the worst team in the conference.
I was about to say, let's shoehorn that into the next one, the Detroit Pistons. I don't think the Pistons are necessarily that much better thanks to this offseason, but I do think Charlotte comes down to them in a major way. What was the difference between them between last year? Just a few games.
Not much.
Yeah. So I think Detroit ends up being technically better because someone in that conference is going to go technically worse. So
Mhm.
I'm going to say Detroit's better because of that and that alone.
I think Detroit can make a pretty big jump. I can see them winning 12 to 13 more games this year and maybe doing what Orlando did last year.
Okay.
So much of that hinges on Cade Cunningham being healthy. But
Yeah.
there are young legs all over this roster. Bojan Bogdanovic stays there as kind of their lone veteran guy, but they bring in Joe Harris. So they've got some shooting now around these young guys. I love that the Pistons took a flyer on James Wiseman and Marvin Bagley. Are those bigs going to be in their future? Jalen Duren certainly is. Jaden Ivey showed that he's an NBA player. I think Oscar Thompson can be an NBA player. We don't know if Killian Hayes yet is an NBA player. But Monty Morris was a fantastic backup for the Denver Nuggets. Played okay with the Wizards last year. But you have 3 adults in the room in Detroit who actually can play minutes, and you're not going to be really in that big of trouble. But this all comes down to Cunningham. If he's healthy and he gets to play with Jaden Ivey in that backcourt and Thompson gets into the mix, Alec Burks, another veteran, still there too, and you get something out of Wiseman who showed some flashes, as they figure this out, I think Detroit is going to be one of those teams that on the nights they're on actually does sneak up on people and steals wins where you're going to be surprised that they do it. And yeah, they win 10 more games than last year. So I see them as being noticeably better. But how much of that goes out the window if Cunningham gets hurt again? And are we talking about major bust status for Cade Cunningham if as a number 1 pick, he's 3 years in a row of missing major time?
We may have to entertain that thought. We may have to entertain it. All right, Joel C. Cortez, that's going to do it for us in the Gary Payton issue. You know what we basically decided here? Your New York Knicks are destined for greatness, and the rest of the teams, go battle for second place. Nothing wrong with silver medal. You guys can enjoy that. But that's going to do it for, I guess, the glove episode, Mr. Cortez.
Yeah, we'll be back next week. We'll look at the Western Conference. We'll do a rundown again, good, better, same. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll get to the predictions episode right before the season gets started. And we'll run down our predicted standings and winners and award winners and all that good stuff. It's a fun time of year where, yeah, we only have stuff to go off on paper, but prognosticating and pretending like we know what we're talking about is a lot of fun.
Joel, and I just got a notification on LinkedIn that someone else has reacted to last week's episode on your LinkedIn. So look at that.
Remember how many of our predictions over the last couple of years have come true. So
y'all getting high. Y'all know what's going on. We know what it is. New camera for me. Same terrible analysis for me. That's what we're going to do here, Joel. Say goodbye to the good people, Mr. Cortez.
Have a good one. The Gary Payton episode is in the books. We'll be back next week on Basketball by Association. Like, share, subscribe for the video version on YouTube. And if you want the audio-only version, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts, that's where we is. We'll see you.
That's it. Bye!